All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome to tonight's forum on minority youth, inequities, and justice. My name is Lauren Williams, Adult and Community Services Manager at the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System, and we're glad to be co-hosting tonight's forum. Just a bit of Zoom housekeeping before we get started. If you have questions for our speakers, we'll be using the Zoom's chat feature. So if you hover over your Zoom screen, you'll see the chat icon that looks like a speech bubble. Just click that and you can type your question for our panelists. If you're on an iPad or a phone, you may need to tap the middle of your screen to see those tools come up. So that's how we'll be asking questions. And now I'd like to welcome our moderator for tonight's forum, Marie Scala. Marie is a Columbia-Boone County League of Women Voters board member and a Columbia-Boone County Board of Health member. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Lauren, very much. And welcome to everyone who's participating. Thank you for tuning in. We've got a packed program tonight, so I'm going to be very, very brief. But in planning this forum, it actually originated with the Civil Liberties Committee within the League of Women Voters. And we're wrestling with the phrase school to prison pipeline and trying to understand what that expression really means, and wanted to learn more about it, and thought many people in our community would too, to learn how school discipline and the justice system are related, and what are the inequities in the system, and how do they affect young lives in our community. This is the first of a two-part forum. So what we're going to be focusing on tonight are the issues, and for the most part. 2 weeks from now, there will be a follow-up forum that will really look at what's being done in our community to try to address those issues, and how you as individuals can actually get involved in some of those efforts. So I'll introduce the panel members just real briefly here. Our first speaker will be Renita Norwood, who is the Superintendent of Student Services, or Supervisor of Student Services with the Columbia Public Schools. I tried to give you a promotion there. And then we'll hear from Ruth McCluskey, who is the Chief Juvenile Officer for the 13th Judicial Circuit, which covers both Boone and Callaway counties. Then we have Sarah Johnson, and you might wave so people know which one you are. Sarah Johnson is on the Children's Defense Team. She's a public defender in St. Louis. We'll have Asia Smith, who is a Battle High School senior and who is just recently received the Martin Luther King Jr. Award for Outstanding Youth Service from the local chapter of the NAACP. And she's here to share the perspective, her perspective as a young person of color. And then finally, we'll have Steve Callaway, who is representing the Minority Men's Network. And Steve is going to talk to us, kind of do the wrap up for the session at the end. And then we will hopefully allow 20 to 25 minutes for questions. So as Lauren said, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Renita Norwood.
Thank you. Lauren, I'm ready. I've got just a few slides to kind of go along for the visual learners. Thank you, and it is my honor to represent Columbia Public Schools in this forum tonight. Our next slide. As recently as 2013, students of color were 7 times more likely to be referred for a discipline suspension. The district began to address our discipline disparities by implementing professional development for teachers and administrators. The first building block was equity, to bring about an awareness that our own socialization, stereotypes, and assumptions may affect how we as staff personally perceive an infraction or discipline offense. For example, a student yelling, not having a good moment in the hallways or in a classroom. One staff member may interpret that as the student is upset, give them a moment to calm down, get back to class. Where another staff member might interpret that as the student is being insubordinate or disrespectful and would have written them up, sent them to the office for discipline, and the student very well may have been suspended for a day or two. The next building block is restorative practices. The premise is building community so that students feel engaged and participatory and welcomed at school. And sometimes infractions, offenses do occur, but restorative practices ask us to separate the deed from the doer. The doer, the student themselves, is not a bad person. They just had unacceptable behavior. And on behalf of the district, that behavior may have to be addressed. CPS has not reached 100% equity, but we are proud to report tonight that there has been a drastic reduction of almost half of suspensions. Our difficulty in this interconnection of incidents is that they occur in the community. And these incidents generate anxiety and great concern among our students, our staff, and our community, particularly when a story has been heard on Channel 8 and Channel 17, and the victim may still very well be in the school building, in the neighborhood, or even on the school bus. Policy JG of the Missouri State Board School Board Association really lays out the parameters for student discipline, particularly on the reporting to law enforcement, documentation in student discipline record, conditions of suspension, expulsion, and other disciplinary consequences, and even the overall parameters of consequences. CPS provides each student and family a student handbook, which names the code of conduct and really lays out incidents and what that possible consequence and or discipline will be for that offense or that infraction. The next slide, please. So thinking about CPS's continued response, we will continue to respond to discipline disparities. We are excited to continue our work with the juvenile justice system. To date, that has included a creation and implementation of the day treatment program under the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. Students under court supervision are able to attend school. We convene a monthly juvenile school and administrator meeting. And we have the ACE program now as an option for in-school suspension at another location within the district, rather than a student being on an out-of-school suspension and being at home. Discipline disparities is not a Columbia, but a national issue. CPS will continue restorative practices with its current 28 certified trainers, and equity with its 42 current certified trainers. CPS will continue due process with the Director of Safety and Security and the Chief Equity Officer. Some students go right back to school after a suspension. However, there are some non-negotiables, and that top tier would be a loaded gun on school property. So policy JG is guiding. The Director of Safety and Security, the Chief Equity Officer, and I will continue to be consistent with policy within a case-by-case framework. We will continue the hallmark of restorative practice to make amends and to welcome students back, and again, separate the incident, the behavior, from the actual student as a person. The next slide, please. And CPS continues to refine the behavior policies with the goal of being more consistent across our school buildings. This will be in line with our district equity statement that was just adopted, that we will, within the students and staff in their own individual identities, establish and sustain human dignity, justice, equitable treatment, and the inclusiveness in the classroom and the workplace. Again, we want discipline policies and how they're implemented to continue the downward trend in our discipline disparities for the district. Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate what Renita said, how much I appreciate being invited to be a part of this forum to discuss this very important issue, and to also inviting community engagement around, problem solving with the issue. I have been a juvenile officer for 25 years here in this circuit, and I worked about half of my career in our detention facility. I've worked in community supervision the other half, and have been the chief juvenile officer for about 6 years. So I just want to go over a little bit about what the federal law says about racial and ethnic disparities in juvenile justice, what we are doing on a state level, and then what we've done on a local level. And then to talk about next steps, and like I said, invite engagement as to suggestions of how we can continue to improve, because we know the disparities continue to exist, and it's going to be not a problem that we're going to solve without continued efforts, but just to invite that discussion. So, sorry, my screen is not advancing. Let me try one more time. Sorry about that. This should work. Okay. So the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, it was originally signed in 1974 by President Gerald Ford. It has been modified several times throughout the years, as recently as 2018. But there are 4 core requirements related to juvenile justice. One is deinstitutionalization of status offenders, so not placing runaways and truants, kids who have not committed criminal offenses, into a secure placement such as a detention center. Obviously, separating juveniles from adult inmates, removing juveniles from adult jails and lockups, and finally, identifying and reducing racial and ethnic disparities among youth who come in contact with our system. As I mentioned, this law was first enacted in 1974 and has had modifications throughout. In 2002 was when we started looking at disproportionate minority contact, not only confinement, but contact. So it's not just about incarceration, and disparities in incarceration, but also any point in the juvenile justice system, at the point of their referral, at the point of which kids are referred to the actual court process, which cases are handled outside of court, et cetera. In 2018, the most recent revision, it reauthorized substantially amending the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act and requires us to address disproportionate minority contact. And states must now identify and reduce racial and ethnic disparities. As far as a definition of the problem, racial and ethnic disparities exist if a specific minority group's rate of contact at a particular point in the system is different than the rate of non-Hispanic, whites, or other minority groups. States are to achieve this core requirement through following identification of the problem, through data collection and tracking, development of an actual plan, an action plan, and also outcome-based evaluation. This goes just a little more in depth about the core requirement regarding racial and ethnic disparities. Each state must report on its progress and its comprehensive review to the federal government and subsequent plan updates. The reviews of the plan are updated annually, and any state that fails to identify and reduce racial and ethnic disparities among youth who come in contact with our system stand to lose federal funding. In 2018, the new version was implemented. Like I said, and the points of contact that we have to assess and evaluate have to do with, first, the point of arrest, second, the point of diversion, or whether or not the child is diverted from formal court process, pretrial detention, disposition commitments, and also adult transfer, juveniles being transferred to the adult system. I can tell you that in Missouri, we've been working on this problem since 1988. There was a committee formed by the Missouri Juvenile Justice Advisory Group to look at this issue. Missouri Juvenile Justice Association in 2000 hired a full-time person to assist in collecting data and assess the problems with disproportionate minority contact in Missouri. In 2009, different grants have been awarded to fund a full-time DMC coordinator through Missouri Juvenile Justice, and also a data analyst through the Office of State Courts Administrator. In 2011, the juvenile division of our local circuit developed a disproportionate minority contact committee to work on ensuring racial and ethnic fairness fairness when referring youth of color, as well as case level decision making at our office. Some of the different strategies that we've implemented, we developed a teen court process in the middle schools, some of the middle schools in Columbia, to allow kids who might have committed a minor school-based offense to be referred to a teen court as opposed to a formal referral to the juvenile office. We assisted in the development of Family Access Center for Excellence, which of course now exists to take referrals from the schools and families and members in the community for kids who are struggling with mental health issues and other behavioral issues, so that they can receive services through that agency rather than having to be referred to juvenile court. There's also a memorandum of understanding with law enforcement and the Columbia Public Schools to try to reduce the number of minor school-based offenses that are referred to the court. As Renita mentioned, we have a juvenile justice group that meets regularly monthly throughout the school year between juvenile court staff and court administration and the Columbia Public Schools Administration. And I know that Missouri Juvenile Justice Association has offered training to local law enforcement agencies regarding implicit bias. As a part, or another effort that we've been working on locally since 2009, I believe, is the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. And this is through the NAACP Foundation. It was initiated more than 25 years ago. But the main goals are to reduce the number of youth who are detained or unnecessarily or inappropriately, decreasing the number of youth who fail to appear for court appearances, redirecting public funds towards successful reform strategies, and reducing disproportionate minority contact within the juvenile justice system. The 13th Circuit has been working to implement this since 2009. And since 2009, we've had a collaborative team of law enforcement, staff from the Division of Youth Services, mental health providers, and other community organizations and the schools to talk about the issue of juvenile detention alternatives to try to make improvements in this area. Another focus since implementing JDAI has been in the area of developing detention alternatives, community-based programs that can be used for kids to receive services in lieu of being placed in detention. My office currently has an evening reporting center. We offer crisis intervention services, in-home detention in lieu of being placed in detention, and we have another program called conditional release. So as I said, I feel like we're obligated for many reasons to address these issues, but this just gave an overview of what the federal law requires and then what steps we've tried to make statewide and locally to make improvements with racial and ethnic disparities in the system. But I would always welcome feedback and questions about how we can continue to improve. I put my contact information on my last slide if anyone would like to send an email for more information or is interested in being a part of our meetings and discussions, and also obviously my phone number there at the juvenile office.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Our next speaker is going to be Sarah Johnson, who's with the Children's Defense Team. She's a public defender in St. Louis, and she apparently is a defender for young people who are being tried in juvenile court. So Sarah, can you share your perspective with us?
Great, thank you. I don't have a slideshow, but I thought I would just talk about our role as juvenile defenders and what we do in the public defender system. So I've been a public defender for 12 years. I represented adults to begin with, and then started representing young people, and they captured my heart for many reasons, and that there is just an incredible amount of hope and that the ability for young people to really make a difference that kind of changed my perspective and made me want to be a juvenile defender full time. So we have two specific juvenile units, one in Kansas City and one in St. Louis, that just represent young people. And that's called the Children's Defense Team. The legislature was great and gave us money a little over 2 years ago. And so we are up and running and we represent young people. Any young person under the age of 18 who is charged with what is called a delinquent offense. And that is juvenile court lingo for a crime. So any young person who is charged with something as low as stealing all the way up until murder, those are the young people that we represent. And the interesting part about juvenile court is everything that's done in juvenile court is supposed to be done for the best interest of the child. So that's what Ms. McCluskey, that's how she functions, how the court functions. But as the lawyer for the young person, we advocate for what the child wants. So whether that young person is 12 years old or whether they're 17 years old, they are in the driver's seat about what should happen with their case. And I know that sounds a little bit unique because a 12-year-old might not have a lot of perspective about what happens in the courtroom or what evidence is, but that's our job as defenders, is to help that young person understand what's going to happen at the court hearing, what's going to happen in a trial, what could happen in a certification hearing, and then help them to make the decision that they feel like is the best decision for them. So we do that every day. We do that in the St. Louis region, and then we help folks statewide. So I really like the background that Ms. Norwood and Ms. McCluskey gave, talking about racial disparities. And I think some of the ways that we see young people pushed out of school or disproportionately impacted are status offenses. So if a young person is pushed out of school because they're not attending school, let's say they're referred to the juvenile court for truancy. They might not have a clean uniform, and they might be embarrassed about not having the right clothes. So thinking about, or do they not have transportation to school? So addressing those issues outside of the courtroom rather than addressing them in the courtroom. And so that's what Ms. McCluskey talked about with the Juvenile Justice Delinquency and Prevention Act, is keeping those kids out of the juvenile system and providing community resources for them so that they don't get pushed deeper into the system. Another way we see young people kind of get pushed deeper into the system is through the Safe School Act violations. So Safe School Act violations are laid out by statute, but it could be something as low level as property damage that puts a young person out of school. And we know that if a young person is not able to re-enter school, and if they're not graduating with their high school diploma, they are more likely to get pushed deeper into the system. We also heard about the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative, which is a wonderful initiative to keep young people out of the detention center. And there are several factors that have to go into deciding whether or not a young person is detained or released. One of the factors, however, is how many referrals or how many times the police officers have brought a young person's case into court. And we know that Black and brown youth are more likely to be referred to the juvenile court, even if the charges don't stick. And so sometimes that scoring element could be considered against the young person, even if they have not been found guilty of anything, and cause them to be detained. So I'm kind of jumping back and forth, but thinking about detention. So detention is a way that a young person can be kept in the system. And we know that if a young person is kept in the detention center, then they're not in their community. So Ms. McCluskey talked about community-based alternatives. And we know when young people are able to be released in the community and have the community wrap their arms around them, they are more successful on court supervision if they're eventually placed on some sort of probation. So that's kind of the detention piece. And then we represent the young people through trial. And Mr. Vietz put in the chat, talk about why young people don't have jury trials and talk about proof. So the proof for a trial is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So the court in a juvenile case is the judge and the jury. So there are no jury trials in juvenile court. They are closed proceedings. So they're not open to the public for the most part. There are some cases that are deemed serious enough that they could be open to the public. But again, it's that best interest, that parents patriae model, where they believe that, if we keep things closed for young people, then we're protecting them. I will say, here is the hard part about not having juries. Here's the hard part about sometimes having the perception of closed proceedings, is they're not always closed, because we know young people have their fingerprints taken when they are brought into juvenile court, If they are adjudicated of a felony, it is considered an open record. So if that young person goes to apply for a job, that could pop up on a background check. If they want to go into the military, that information can be shared with the military. So there are some hard pieces about, you know, a young person's record following them. And so it's part of our job to make sure that we're protecting that young person. And then just thinking about future impact, right? So we know kids are different. Everybody recognizes that young people's brains are developing. We know that a lot of the young people that come into the juvenile justice system have several factors under the ACEs model, which is deals with adverse childhood trauma. So we want to make sure that when we are representing young people and when we're looking at young people in the juvenile system, we are recognizing that one, they're developing, two, children have this amazing ability to be rehabilitated and that have this amazing capacity to grow. And three, also that we are taking into consideration their whole life story, which includes both the positives and the hardships, which a lot of young people that we represent face that trauma. So that's just a nutshell of what we do. We interface with people like Ms. McCluskey and Ms. Norwood every day. Community partners are so important. And so we're really grateful to be a part of this conversation. So thank you so much, Marie.
Thank you. Just to clarify, an obvious question, I guess, is do we have a counterpart to this here locally, or are kids just defended by regular public defenders here in Central Missouri?
I would say that no public defender is a regular public defender. they're all my people, but we don't have a specialized unit. No. So what I am developing, Marie, right now is we are developing a cohort of specialized juvenile defenders statewide who can represent young people. We just had a training earlier in January where we brought together statewide public defenders to represent them, because it is specialized. You have to understand schooling implications. You have to understand mental health. You have to understand adolescent brain development. So all of these components are so important. And so yes, we are hopeful that maybe someday, I don't know if I'll still be working as a public defender, but someday we'll have a community of juvenile defenders in the public defender system.
Great. Glad that's an aspiration anyway. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to hold all the questions to the end. Some of them are specific to specific speakers, but some of them we may get multiple perspectives on. So we'll go ahead with Asia. Asia Smith is next. She's our Battle High School student, and she's going to share with us a youth perspective on this whole issue. So go ahead, Asia.
All righty, well, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Asia Smith. I am 17 years old, and I'm currently attending Battle High School. And I just wrote down really my general perspective on my take on the U.S. justice system. I can say that I haven't really had any direct contact with being in a courtroom or being prosecuted in any way, shape, or form, which is a good thing. But I've always been aware of the U.S. justice system has not been fair amongst persons of color, especially amongst Black Americans. I'm constantly reminded this whether I want to or not. So I take it a point to educate myself further on what, are these disparities that occur within the justice system and how I can understand them and what is the corrective action as to trying to combat some of the inequalities that happen to occur within it. So I'll just go down from my talking points, and here we go. So me personally, I'm aware that there is a disproportionate amounts of African-American inmates in prosecutions, with more harsher punishments being implemented on them for lesser crimes rather than their white counterparts. This I've always been aware of and known, whether it more explicitly, a good example I've witnessed this from or heard this from was the War on Drugs initiative in the previous presidential initiative to try to criminalize those who are addicted to certain substances, when in reality, from my understanding, it's more complex than it is, and it really should be, viewed as a rehabilitation type aspect, as it's not that these people obtain these things because out of a whim. It's more so you have to think, why are they doing it? Why is it because of their environment? It's a coping mechanism. Is it something that that we're not really looking deeper into? So that is one thing that I've been aware of. Another thing is, I feel that the policing system has been very militarized over the course of history. A prime example of that I've seen was from the recent reignition of the Black Lives Matter movement following the death of George Floyd. As you probably are all aware, we've seen multiple instances of peaceful protesters being met with police fronts that have ended up turning violent, some more than others, but as we've seen, the ratio as to how prepared the police were to contact for peaceful protesters there was a dramatic difference. So battering rams, shields, gear, horses, tanks. There's just so much that has just been provided to the policing units that is, to me, I've found a little bit concerning. Well, not a little bit, but it's very, very questioning. So, excuse me, just got to go on my notes. Alrighty, so personally, I am blessed to say that I've never had a negative encounter with policemen or officers, but I have accumulated more knowledge of incidents of unarmed Black men, women, and children being wrongfully killed by police. And as that accumulation became more and more persistent throughout the years of me actually being aware of it, I become more and more nervous and anxious when encountering with law enforcement and policemen. Like I said, I never had a negative interaction with them, nor have, my personal family, my immediate family had any negative encounters with them. But every time when we're doing a routine pullover or stop with my mother or with my family members and we are followed by the police, I have this involuntary nervousness and anxiousness that kind of follows behind me by proxy, just simply from what I've witnessed over the years. And me personally, as a Black female, I constantly worry about the relationship as to the justice system applying to my family, particularly my brother. As a developing Black male in society, I know that he's a sweet boy and I love him to death, but I know in some instances he does have a target on his back from time to time. And I'm not jinxing what will occur in the future, but it is something that I constantly worry about. My other family members that have had more vivid negative experiences with the justice system and racial discrimination. I hear many stories of backwards encounters with family members of simple slap on the wrist crimes that ended up escalating into something really unnecessary when it came to the response of what law enforcement and police have referred or done in response of that crime, as well as my peers and African American people overall. As a part of the community, of course, I always care for those. It's not always great to witness all of these things occurring to the people that you share your community with. And of course, my future children, I sometimes worry if we'll be past this, if we'll be over this, if it'll be easier for them in the future. Hopefully it will be, but if not, hopefully I can equip them with the materials that my family, my mother, my community has taught me on how to, better combat this, as well as trying to deal with it the best they can. And last but not least, of course, I ultimately, sometimes I worry myself as to what my future will consist of. I strive to look for the good in people, not judge initially, unless, I know you really well, then, but hopefully, I'm optimistic. That is my thing. But to conclude, I know one thing is for sure. Despite all these fears and anxieties I have, I still strive to advocate in combating the epidemic of racism overall in any way that I possibly can. So I love learning. So one thing that I constantly do is try to educate myself on my current events, my community, what I can do, what has happened in the past. I love learning about Black history, especially. So one thing that I know that is in my power to help combat all of these things is to, like I said, educate myself further, openly talk about it with other folks, openly talk and develop more experiences and perspectives from different people, particularly of color, and take that information and, with the help of the NAACP, hopefully do what I can to, just combat in the best way, because I know plenty of people before me have done it. Now it's my turn. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your dedication and for your hopeful view of the future. We need to hear that. Steve, you are up next.
Okay. So thank you, Maury and Lauren and NAACP. Thanks for engaging Minority Men's Network in this program tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel with all these outstanding panelists who have brought some really important perspectives to the issue of minority youth and the criminal and the justice system, the inequities that exist there. I want to try to kind of tie a few things together and maybe set the stage for kind of thinking about our part 2 session in 2 weeks. So first of all, as a Black man, so I want to talk about Ms. Norwood's section in there in Columbia Public Schools. So one of the things we started in talking about is the school to prison pipeline. I'm not 100% sure that we really explained the school to prison pipeline real well, but the idea is that the premise is that disproportionate there are things that function together as a system that have a tendency to move or drive students, particularly students of color, that are in contact with schools, drive them to the prison, more likely to be incarcerated, that sort of thing. And what you heard from particularly Ms. McCluskey and Ms. Johnson is that the contact that our students have for, in minor infractions and things like that, those are the things that over time have resulted in our students being, wound up being sent to the principal. And then, they get upset about something. And then the juvenile officer calls in. Having SROs, school resource officers, is pointed to as one of the things involved. Zero tolerance policies. Again, there are lots of things that the public school folks can talk about. And I like the idea that while we know all of those things that have existed traditionally in our school and contributed to the school to prison pipeline, if you can address those things through policies, through the justice system itself, so that as Ms. Johnson and Ms. McCluskey mentioned, students don't go deep into the justice system, then that's going to help, disrupt this pipeline. But so in the end, these systems that we have are really the way for us to think about it. So I think what all of us would agree is that no teacher, no police officer, no judge really wants to, do harm to a kid. Nobody wants to be racist to people, but we do have biases that have come about through history, through all the different things that have happened. And so one of the things that I want to just level set for you, maybe we'll raise some questions and set the things for next week are, one of the things we know now that Ms. Norwood didn't mention, but I hope we'll mention, is talking about trauma-informed care. So not asking students, what's wrong with you? How can we fix you? but what happened to you. And what has happened to our students, to us, to people, to Black folks, is we're talking about the effects of systemic racism. So, and that didn't start with the schools. That didn't exactly start with our communities. And it's not the people that are involved, but it's what did the system do? What are the ways in which the systems of health, wealth and the economy, housing, employment, and education, in what way did they all interact and intersect to create a situation of disparity such that we have people who are traumatized? They come to our schools, they come to our workplaces, they come to our healthcare systems, and they have trauma. So, we're not talking about healthcare tonight. We're not talking about segregated housing that creates the need for our school boards to gerrymander school attendance districts to balance out the population of students that are eligible for free and reduced lunch. We don't talk about that. But that's what is involved in talking about systemic racism. So the policies and laws and things that we have in place to address those, that's exactly what they should do. And we need to stop blaming the people for the situation they're in. So, well, they just get in trouble more often. Well, why do they get in trouble more often? What's happened to them that causes that to happen? Same way, the example of people getting COVID. People of color have more frequency of getting COVID. And you say, well, they have more diseases and more chronic diseases and that sort of stuff. Well, why do they have more chronic diseases? It's because they live in areas that are subject to more environmental pollution. They live in areas of cities and communities that have been disinvested in. So I'm just saying that this issue of juvenile minority inequities, injustice, is way bigger than just what the school district can do, or what the criminal justice system can do, what the courts can do, and what individual teachers can do. But it really takes all of those and begins with a realization of the systemic nature of where we are. Years and years of people of color who have not been respected, who have had laws passed that discriminated against them. And so it hasn't been that long since we passed Brown versus Board of Education. It hasn't been that long since we passed the Equal Rights, Amendment, since we passed the Civil Rights Law in 1965. It hasn't been that long. So these longstanding things that affect our people, and they don't just affect kids, they affect families and whole communities. We have to do things to reverse that, and understanding, realizing, acknowledging that we have these things that impact us is really the start of how we go about trying to fix this problem. But we need all these pieces, and we need to understand how all of them interact so that we can truly address the problem, not keep kicking it down the road and doing little things that really don't make a difference. So hopefully that sets the stage for us to talk about next session. And I think I'll turn it back to Mari so we can get some questions answered.
Thank you very much. We have some really good questions in the chat, and I think we have plenty of time to get to all of them, but I'm going to take the prerogative to ask a couple of questions first. The first one is directed to Ms. Norwood, and it's regarding some of the things on your slide about training and about restorative justice. Could you talk a little more about those efforts within the school system, both the equity training, and then maybe define for our listeners what restorative justice is and how that works in Columbia Public Schools?
Well, Restorative Practices, which is under the restorative justice umbrella, excuse me, is the International Institute of Restorative Practices out of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And the district first got involved with that over 8 years ago, sent 2 persons to be trained. They came back. And again, now we have a team of well over 28 trained facilitators. And so again, the premise is there will be infractions, whatever we would say they were. Thank you, Mr. Calloway, for saying that. Again, example that I gave from a student is upset about something in the hallway, and one person says they're yelling, calm down. The other person says you're being disrespectful, you're cursing, bye, write you out suspension. All the way to, like you said, somebody's bought drugs on campus, a gun on campus, those kind of things. So it's multi-tiered of what the offense can be. But the premise is the student did an offense. They did an unacceptable behavior. It's not that the student themselves is a bad person. And it's all about building the community. So when we think about community, that's the school. So what your individual school is. But as Asia was saying, even for your school, we're all in the same community. So even from my offices as student services and having the discipline hearings, I tell families it's a discipline conversation. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a gavel or anything like that to hear and make a decision on behalf of the district, but you're still our student. I always tell families, I'm going to see you again at McDonald's. I'm going to see you at a steakhouse. I'm going to see you at the mall. So let's not hate one another. Let's not throw and toss each other away. We're still in this together. And even what Mr. Calloway was talking about and District Attorney Johnson was talking about, there may be the behavior, but what else is going on? Is the family experiencing homelessness? Are they hungry? What's going on? There are multi pieces usually to a student's behavior. And so it's not just that they broke a window. What else was going on that got them to the point of breaking the window? And again, the school district cannot do it all, but we want to be that link and collaborate with our other agencies. Again, not just juvenile services. We want that referral to juvenile to be the last thing. We are asking our administrators, what else does this student and family need? Have we done the FACE referral? Are they seeing our school counselor? Have they had time with the homeschool communicator? What else is there before we write that juvenile referral? Because we again, drastically do not want to be a part of that prison, school to prison pipeline. As Ms. Johnson was saying, when you get into the scoring and all that, we don't want to send the students referral over to juvenile, even for truancy. The district has really dialed that back. Why is the student not coming to school? Does that have to be a referral to the legal system to get them to school? Is it transportation? Again, where are they staying? Who are they staying with? Parents, what's going on that we can get you to school, not a juvenile referral?
Okay, thank you very much. I had a follow-up question for Ms. McCluskey as well. I was real interested in your slide that showed that there are certain sort of benchmarks or data that you will be collecting to measure disparities in the system. And I just wondered, it seemed like that may be a real recent thing, but has that data been collected? And if so, is it available? Or could you give us a nutshell summary of it? You're muted, I'm sorry.
That data is continually collected through the Office of State Court Administrator. We enter information into our database about cases, and then at the state level, that data is analyzed. There's actually a data analyst on staff at Office of State Court Administrator who looks at the data for each county and breaks it down for us. I don't have it available to me this evening, but maybe in a follow-up meeting, I could provide some of that data because we have been tracking it for a number of years in terms of the referral point. What's the level of disproportionality at the point of a juvenile being referred to the system? What's the level of disproportionality when it comes to whether or not we file a petition to go to court or we agree to handle it outside of court? What about when we get to disposition in the case and the disproportionality of which kids go on probation as opposed to those who might be going further into the system, like to Division of Youth Services? And then finally, for kids who are transferred to the adult court, looking at the data related to that and making sure and monitoring the disparities in that decision making as well.
Is there any, are there any figures that stand out to you that would give us just a general idea of the degree of disparity or what the trends are?
Yeah, I can tell you that approximately 10 years ago, there's a term called the relative rate index that I'm not a mathematician, but basically is a number that shows the likelihood that a youth of color would be referred to the system as opposed to a white youth. And the relative rate index in Boone County about 10 years ago was, I believe, 7.8. We had, through some of these efforts, been able to get it down to 5 point something. It was the most recent number that I heard. But I don't have like current data for 2020. I expect that 2020 is going to be very skewed anyway because of the pandemic, and referrals have been down for various reasons related to that. So it's probably not the best year to analyze. But and like I said, I'm happy to provide that at the next forum, at least the trend, the graph over the last 10 years, because I know we have that available.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The other question I had for you is, you had mentioned bias training for police, that was being offered. Do you know whether that's been taken advantage of here in Boone County?
I do know it was provided at one time by Missouri Juvenile Justice Association. Within the last 5 years, I don't know the last time it was provided though, but it was offered and provided, at least to Columbia Police Department. I'm not sure about the county.
Thank you. Turning to the questions in the chat, one question is, and this could be directed, I guess, to you or to Sarah or to both of you, is the question of why do juveniles not have a right to be presumed not guilty, proven guilty beyond reasonable doubt, and have a jury? I know you you referred to this a little bit, Sarah, but the why question, do you have any response to that, either of you?
Yeah, so young people are presumed innocent. The burden of proof is the same for a delinquency petition. It is not the same burden of proof for what's called a motion to modify. So let's say a young person is adjudicated delinquent, so they find that the allegations are true. Let's say it's shoplifting. So you've admitted to the shoplifting charge. You go home on supervision, and then let's say you stop reporting to your deputy juvenile officer and you test positive for drugs and you pick up, a new offense. I guess I shouldn't say the new offense. Let's just say you stop reporting to your DJO and you pick up, you test positive for drugs. The juvenile officer, Ms. McCluskey's office, can file what's called a motion to modify. That in adult court is what's called a probation violation. The standard of the burden of proof in that is lower. It's a preponderance of the evidence. So the court only has to believe a little more than 50% that you committed the offense. So that burden of proof is different. And I think it just goes back to that parents patriae, that putting themselves in the parent's shoes model, that best interest of the child model, why we don't have jury trials and why things are much more closed for young people. I would love to have jury trials. I don't know how that would look. But yeah, so that would be my response. The only other thing I'll say, and I know this isn't going specifically to your question. I know Ms. McCluskey unmuted herself. I've attached in the chat a link to the Office of State Court Administrators reports. So they do those reports every year, and it talks about the relative rate index and the race breakdown statewide in several of those pages. So
thank you. Thanks very much. This question is for, did you have something to add, Ruth? Did you want to add anything?
I don't think so. I believe that Sarah covered it, and I appreciate her sharing the data from OSCA for us.
Okay, great. The next question pertains to Callaway County. What steps are being taken within Callaway County to reduce the disparities? Is your office working with any of Callaway County's public schools in similar ways to how it works with Columbia Public Schools?
Okay, so Callaway County is a part of our Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, and they have been throughout this process as long as our circuit's been involved. So we have continually worked there to reduce the number of youth who are detained. And as Sarah alluded to, we have a scoring system, a statewide form called the Juvenile Detention Assessment that we use anytime a child is in custody. So we have an objective scoring tool to decide, which kids might be safe to be released to a parent or placed on some alternative like home detention, and those who would need to be placed in detention. So as part of that initiative, Callaway County has always been involved in that. The issue with the racial and ethnic disparities, or what used to be called disproportionate minority contact, is less of their relative rate index is not as high as Boone County. And I think that more urban areas have been identified, areas like Springfield or Greene County, Boone County, Cole County, as the sites that have the biggest disproportionality based on that. And so the state has focused on our counties as opposed to the more rural counties like Callaway. It's not that they're not cognizant of the issues and working on, addressing the problem, but they weren't identified as a site that needed assistance on the state level. And as far as their communications with the schools, I know that they have regular meetings with school administrators to talk about services and ways to potentially keep kids from being referred to juvenile court, but they don't have the same meeting process that we have with Columbia. And there's not a memorandum of understanding in place in any of the Callaway districts with the court and law enforcement. So,
okay, thank you very much. This next one is for you as well. Please describe the crisis intervention services offered by the 13th Circuit.
Okay, so if we have a youth who is in custody with law enforcement and they're scoring in what we call an alternative to detention range. So on this assessment that we do, they're not scoring at the level of just being released to a parent, and they're not scoring at needing secure detention. One of the options that we have is we have a contract with local therapists who agree to provide a very limited service to the family in terms of assessment of what might be going on and why law enforcement had to be contacted, and then making a recommendation to our office about additional services that might benefit the family. It's a very short-term intervention, but they would provide a report then back to the juvenile office about the family, about what they saw as some of the crises or barriers, and services that they would recommend to help the family. So that's what our crisis intervention program is.
Thank you very much. This next one is for Sarah Johnson, and the question is, how large is your caseload?
That's a really good question. So as juvenile defenders, one thing I didn't mention is that juvenile cases move really fast. So a young person's case is going to be resolved in between 30 to 60 days, probably. If it's more serious, it might be longer. So our caseloads are smaller than some of the other offices, but they turn over every 30 to 60 days. So I would say that my lawyers are in court every day, almost all day. And they are doing hearings all the time. So while our numbers are smaller than the other public defender offices, we are moving fast. So it is. And I actually was in a meeting with both of our children's defense teams today, talking about representing young people and how it's different, because a lot of these defenders came from adult public defender offices, and they speak to not only how important it is to protect the young person and make sure that they are receiving all of the due process protections, but also kind of the emotional toll that it takes, because it's really hard. Young people, it's a scary time for them. It's often the first time they're away from home. They have lots of questions. And so, just to reiterate, our caseloads are smaller, but the impact, I think, and the pressure that we all put on ourselves to make sure that young people aren't pushed deeper into the system, that really is, it's something that's really important to us.
Thank you. And thank you for your dedication. It's amazing. Asia, I have a question for you here in the chat. Kathy Jensen asked, have you talked with Columbia kids who were pushed into the juvenile justice system through Columbia Public Schools? Do you know anyone who?
No one directly. My experience with some like students who are, have more negative experiences with their education system is more so on the likes of, oh, my teacher doesn't like me, I don't like my teacher, therefore they put me into ISS more, or I'm always going to, or I got suspended one day because of something simple, or just a general like distrust of that student's relationship towards school in general, as well as their attitudes towards how their teacher treats them, how peers treats them, how the school treats them, and how they don't like the school because of how they've been treated or their experiences. The closest experience that I've been told from someone who's like had either a negative, experience with just their schooling system is that a person I just happen to know wasn't really doing well in their classes. They had like a lot of, I could say, personal stuff going on, and therefore they had to transfer to Douglas. But that is the only case that I know that is like the highest resemblance of having to switch or go into a corrective system. But besides going from straight to school to juvenile to juvie, I never had anyone who at least upfront told me that they had that experience.
Thank you. I have a question for you, Ms. Norwood. When asks, please describe the assistance and training provided to teachers in CPS with respect to these issues.
Okay. Restorative practice and equity. This year, we are proud to say, even though we've been doing it for the last 4 or 5 years, overall, it was on a voluntary basis. Teachers and staff signed up for professional development in those areas, as well as others. And so those that came were excited for the message, for the learning, for the awareness. But we realized that that was not how we were going to begin to chip away at the iceberg. So this year, it actually became mandatory. There is professional development for everyone. In fact, while we're out on Wednesdays, it's Professional Development Day. Today, I did 2 schools. So there were 20 of us or so actually doing schools today. We did elementary level today. This Wednesday, next Wednesday, we will do secondary level. So it is mandatory now. It is no longer voluntary. So.
And that's great. Is it, I presume, a standardized curriculum of some sort?
It is a standardized curriculum, yes, that we are revising every year based on IEP is very, it is licensed that we have to stick to their script. Whereas equity, there is a little bit of leeway out of St. Louis that they have the curriculum, but we can tweak it again based on your district, your area, those kind of things. So we have 2 persons that do that on the team that adjust the curriculum for Columbia. But yes, they are very much standardized facility trainer scripts that we are following so that everyone gets the same message, the same exercises, all of that.
It's very experiential, I think, from what I've heard from teachers.
Yes, very experiential. And that's the point. It's not a lesson. Again, another learning. We always tell the teachers and the staff that this is another tool in your toolbox. It's, don't take it as it's mandatory, shut down the message. That's not what it's about. It really is for our own self-awareness in the education system of how we do our jobs when we run into this student. And again, from my office at the district office, I always throw in that piece and the family, because you're still talking to that parent, to that guardian, and it's the same tool, whether you're talking to them or the student. We want to build community. We want to work with them. Again, if the words get ugly or whatever that is, we can't just toss you away and finish the conversation. We may have to circle back around and those sort of things. So yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Steve, do you want to verbalize what you put in the chat? I think it's an important point.
Sure. So two things were put in. Number one, I just put in that, there's no way that Columbia Public Schools can cover all the things that they're doing, but I think it's really important that they're focusing on what people might think and believe in their own minds, and to get them to consider a different way of thinking and how they may have contributed things they've learned, the template that has been created, patterns have contributed to their own views about racism and stereotypes and all that. And then somebody mentioned also that they were interested in focusing on endemic systemic racism faced by Black and Indigenous people of color, children particularly, but the effects of systemic class bias against all people who are poor. So the point that I made in the chat is that there's an intimately connected web of all of these systems that I think I mentioned: housing, segregated housing, wealth and economic disparity, health disparities, and then the new situations where it's even more unstable now because we got some people who refuse to acknowledge facts and won't call out untruths. And so, when you add all that up on top of, where we are, it's no wonder our kids have problems in school. It's no wonder we have problems in our community. And one of the persons that put that in there, mentioning that, is works with United Way. So some of our community organizations that are trying to address these things through grants and community nonprofits that have projects and things that they're working on, providing money for things that we believe have been shown to work. That's one of the things that Heart of Missouri United Way is working on doing. So another great community partner, as well as the library, as well as the League of Women Voters and NAACP, everybody trying to work together around this thing. I think we can really make some headway with it. So anyway, but thanks for that opportunity.
Thank you. Just looking at, we have some follow-up questions about Callaway County. And what I would like to do, since we've already devoted time to that initial question, is to ask the questioner to please email Ruth. Is that okay with you, Ruth? And Ruth's email address is further up in the chat. So if you would like to follow up with her on those questions about Callaway County specifically, I'd encourage you to do that. We have a question on, I'll just read it as written. I am interested in focusing on endemic systemic racism faced by BIPOC children, but also the effects of systemic class bias against all people who are poor. Reporting today said 1 in 7 children are hungry tonight. Would anyone like to comment? It's not a question so much, but does anyone have thoughts on that you'd like to contribute?
I will just say this, that I hope the district, again, in our equity and restorative practices, as well as trauma-informed, Mr. Callaway, we've started, but we don't have it blanketed in the overall professional development like we do on others. So there are smaller pockets of professional development on that. But when I think about Columbia Public Schools, we have schools that are classified as Title I schools. And so, again, I'm not gonna put Columbia Public Schools on blast. I'll just say Ms. Norwood with student services. My hope would be that our staff across the district, and particularly if you work in a Title I school, that you have a heart and professionalism for your families and your students that are coming through there. Because government-wise, there's a reason, there's a systemic reason that that school is classified as Title I.
And Title I reflects the number of children who have low incomes who attend that school. Is that correct?
It does. Yes, it does. It would be that number generated based on social economic status. Yes.
And that's a great example. That's a great example of the ways in which the system labels kids. So whether it's kids that are, disabled and they're, have an IEP or different things like that. We're talking about getting kids the resources they need. But what winds up happening is there's stigma that's associated with kids having an IEP or kids having a disability or a whole population of students that are in a school that is a Title I school, right? And so those are the things in our mind that we have learned that have become stereotypes that we gotta break those, Just like a person that has a substance abuse problem, we might label that person as a drug addict, like it's some moral failing when it's not a moral failing, it's a disease. And so, we have to change our language around so many things that we have learned and doesn't make us bad because we consider them as a stereotype. It just means we got to change our language. We have to change our attitude. We have to change our approach is what it really means.
Well, and I think it's an excellent point. Over the last 10 to 15 years, we've had a lot of awareness and training related to racial and ethnic disparities and have tried to work on that issue. But the poverty issue within the system is something that we still forget about. And as an example, one of the biggest infractions you could commit in the court system is to fail to appear for a court date. But if your parents don't have a working vehicle and reliable transportation, then that can be a big issue for a family. We've learned that through the pandemic that a lot of court appearances have been through Zoom or through the phone. And if you don't have access to a computer and Wi-Fi at your house, how can you appear without those resources? And so it's just a good reminder for all of us that that's another way the system doesn't take into account the impact on families who don't have resources.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, and if you've never been in that situation before, you don't have a place to put that thought. It's like we talk to the police and they stop cars where there's 4 youths riding in the car. And the reason there's 4 youths riding in the car, we call it riding by fours. The reason there's 4 youths in the car is only one of them got a car. If you have more economic means, you got your own car. Maybe there's just 2 of you in there versus 4 kids riding in the car because only one got a car and it's a hoopty at that. So I'm just saying there's lots of room to think outside and put ourselves in someone else's shoes or even consider that somebody's got different shoes than us.
Very eloquently put. Every time I glance up, there's 20 more messages. So I guess I need to speed this up a little bit. We have a question. Do you agree that some of the services required of juveniles are often not welcomed by the juveniles and or their parents? I guess that's for Ruth and or Sarah, maybe.
If I can start, I definitely agree with that. And I think there's a multitude of reasons. There is obviously distrust in the system for many families. And when a child is referred on maybe a first referral or a minor offense or something like that, most of the time we try to handle those cases out of court, but that is a voluntary agreement and the family has to be receptive to services and so forth and agree that the court has jurisdiction, that they are willing to work with us. And if it comes to a point where they're declining those services, then we have to make a judgment call about what's in the best interest of the kid. Is this something that maybe it's not worth pressing the issue and we can, just warn them about not having another referral, or are we concerned about the safety of the child or public safety to the point that we would have to, get the court involved with the services? But I definitely think many families don't trust the system, don't trust the services, are worried about if the system becomes aware of other issues going on in the home or in the family, that the kids could potentially be removed. I mean, those kind of things that might prevent them from wanting to engage with us or to cooperate with services.
I would agree. And I think that's where it's so important for a young person to have an advocate in the courtroom, because we all know kids are fairness fanatics. And so if a young person does not believe that something is fair, or they do not believe that they were fairly treated, their ability to cooperate in what, is being then done afterwards is going to be really, really hard. And so That's where two really important things come in. One is that's why we fight like heck. I'm a pain in the rear end, a lot of people will say when I'm in the courtroom. But I truly believe that if I am fighting, if I am the voice for that young person, no matter what happens at the end of the day, that young person sees, hey, my lawyer fought for me, my lawyer stood up in court for me, and my lawyer advocated for what I wanted. And so I've had young people, I've been in tears because we've lost a case or something has happened that I didn't agree with. And that young person will say, Miss Sarah, it's okay. You fought. I'm okay. It's going to be all right. You know, I'm happy. I can do those court services. I can complete probation. And so that's a really important thing to think about is, right, when a young person is in the court system, that's why due process is so important, because if they believe it was fair, then there's that piece that, you know, they're going to be able to successfully complete whatever court services. The other piece is that, and we've learned this through NAACP Foundation, young people can't have 75 conditions of probation put on them, and they can't be the same for every young person. We know every young person is not the same, right? And we know, based on the research, that a young person, about 7 conditions of probation or of supervision is sufficient. After 7, they're not processing that information anymore. So we've got to individualize services for young people that are going to empower them, that are going to help them understand the implications of what they got involved in or were found guilty of, adjudicated of, and something that helps recognize their potential. I just represented a young man recently. He loves football, he loves basketball, and he loves being involved with the church. So guess what? Our supervision plan involved those 3 things. He's doing awesome. So just, you know, making sure, 1, that we're fighting for those young people, and 2, that those services are individualized and particularized to that person.
Great idea. Great idea. Simple, should be a short one. How many students are currently being held in the Juvenile Justice Center in Columbia?
So I didn't look today, but I can tell you it's approximately 14. That includes pre-adjudicated youth and post-adjudicated youth. I will say that not all of those kids are from Boone or Callaway County. We hold kids from other jurisdictions who don't have a detention center within this region, and some are placed there through Division of Youth Services. And so if I had a rough guess off the top of my head, about 5 to 7 Boone County youth are currently placed there. And I would just make the point, when I began working there in 1996, our average daily population was in the high 20s, and that was Boone and Callaway kids. And so we have made some dramatic improvements locally and nationally about incarcerating youth. But the disparities still exist. They still exist about who is incarcerated, but I am proud of that number, because it was many years we ran out of beds. With 32 beds, we were running out of beds, and that never happens anymore. So
great. The next question is about school resource officers. And the questioner asks, is it possible to use tax funds in Boone County to provide school resource officers who are trained in social services resources and can act as both social workers and law enforcement? So I guess Ms. Norwood, or, I mean, there's a couple questions. There's one is about tax funding. And I don't know that we have anybody who's expert in that tonight, but
yeah, I'm not certain about the tax funding part. I know that
as far as
prior to now, the SROs were actually, I won't use the word gifted, but an MOU with the Columbia Police Department. I know there's been some changes this year, so I'm not sure if that's the police department still their staff, or if we have actually now had to hire them. I'm not certain what that looks like. But again, most schools have a homeschool communicator to begin to, again, address things that may be occurring with the family, have school counselors, and most of the secondary schools are having outreach social workers in place. So we do have other staff that are available to, again, check in with that student. Again, what is the trauma? What's going on with you? And then what is going on with the family, to begin to talk about some other resources as well. So I can't say whether there will be that pairing of the SRO will become that person usually associated with social services as their background or their experience. Not certain about that.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a comment on that one? If not, let's see. It's important to get this, again, it's not really a question, but I think it can lead to stimulate some responses. It is important to get resources circulated. If kids and families don't know about the resources, they may as well not exist. Collectively, community resources can put a dent in some of these issues. Does anybody want to speak to how families and children are made aware, or students are made aware of resources?
I would say that I think as the district, we could continue to do a better job of that. Like you said, make sure that families know. But I will just say again, for student services, we give the referrals. Oftentimes the referral has come from the school, some of those other parties that I've said, the counselor, the homeschool communicator, the outreach social worker. But it's kind of back to Mr. Calloway's comment that you have to realize that families with the stigmatization of systems, they really are embarrassed to reach out. And that's where, again, our own biases, our own stereotypes, all of that comes into play, not only in the education system, even within our social service agencies. And I think here in Columbia, we have some great collaborations. My job before the school system was the Salvation Army Harbor House. I love the Harbor House. You know, FACE, we're making referrals to FACE, the wardrobe, all of these entities. But again, if our families, if our students and the guardians go into this realm of embarrassment and stereotyping, then the referral is there, the flyer is there, that information is there, that card is there, but the family will not reach out. And so again, I don't know whether that's going to be the knocking at the door saying, here we are, or what that's going to be. But I think here in Columbia, I also sit on the Be Well Boone County committee in the school district seat. And that's something that we talk about often in that Be Well Boone County. What are we going to do to bridge those stereotypes, to say that, again, the help is here, the assistance is here, you're a part of our community, come here, it's here for you.
Well, thank you. You're providing a great segue to our next forum, which is going to be about some of those resources and how people access them. So thank you. One questioner has a question for Asia. What recommended reading would you recommend for our audience to consider that you found valuable through your research as a young social activist?
Well, for the most part, I am now. My mother calls me a sponge. I love to dig my teeth in something to read or to listen to or to immerse myself in. So I'm always running into something just out of pure curiosity. But I've seen your question and I wrote down a few things that I know were pivotal in like my learning and understanding of the justice, not only the justice system, but like disparities of institutional racism or Black values or any other books or resources that I just happened to come across. So first of all, I'm an old soul. I like watching old movies and listening to older type music. So this is kind of where these come from. But when I read it for the first time, I enjoyed it very much. So there's The Color Purple, the novel. The movie is good as well. I love it. But I read the book before the movie. So I found it to be very enriching of common Black family values, as well as common Black family issues that, strive from the book, as well as I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Maya Angelou is a very prominent inspiration to me. I love her poetry. And some other things that I just thought to write down is the books that I'm currently reading. So one of them is called Trevinoa, Born a Crime. He's a comedian. He's very funny. He talks about his experience living in South Africa in apartheid as a mixed individual, which is very interesting and hilarious. You have America's Original Sin. My mother has a large library of books that I kind of borrow / steal from her. So she recommended to me, she actually got me a copy of the America's Original Sin, which is like debunking the biblical justifications of racism and or slavery aspects, and like how the Bible kind of, contradicts that. I forget these authors' names. I apologize, but there's Born a Crime, America's Original Sin. Those are books. Color Purple, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Some modern versions like The Hate You Give, which was I'm sure some of you will probably be aware of. It was a big book turned into movie. I enjoyed it very much. Let me see. All American Boys, Becoming by Michelle Obama. Let me see. And then some, not only books, but other media such as films like I Am Not Your Negro on Netflix. That is a good summarization of the book. I Am Not Your Negro, which is good, I thought it was very good and intuitive. And 13th, the Netflix documentary talking about strictly how slavery kind of transformed or formed like modern day slavery, basically as the current prison systems. So how it's like slavery, but like in another context or like a loophole. I thought that was very, very informative. And that's how I kind of got a bit of the context of the war on drugs and how that really contributed to it. Let me see.
And that, I believe, is on Netflix, isn't it?
It is. That as well as on Netflix.
Access that. Yeah, that's excellent.
As
Well,
well
thank you. I'm blown away by your ability to come up with all that on such short notice.
Like I said, I'm a sponge. I love reading, and I note down the important things. Just one more thing, I promise. I'm currently reading this. I meant to read this earlier, but I'm currently reading the Autobiography of Malcolm X, which I found to be very interesting. I was reluctant at first, to read it in past years because of I was a little bit intimidated by Malcolm X methods, but as I learned about him more, I understand like where his motives come from, and now I'm literally reading about his perspective. So that is the current book that I'm reading right now. So
thank you so much. Well, we're running out of time, unfortunately. I really appreciate all the participation by the panelists and by all the great questions that were posed. I do want to remind everyone that you should have received a resource link from Lauren when you registered for this Zoom. So that has a lot of good suggestions for reading as well and for follow-up. And then two things that are coming up next Tuesday at noon. This is February the 9th. League of Women Voters and the Public Library are sponsoring a Lunch and Learn program, and that will feature the Heart of Missouri United Way Equity Challenge. It'll be an introduction to the Equity Challenge and an encouragement for folks to participate in that. So we would welcome everyone to sign up for that as well. And then 2 weeks from tonight will be the second of this two-part forum with a different cast of characters and a different focus on services and agencies and organizations here in the community that are addressing these issues. So thank you all so much. The panel has just been wonderful. I just really, really appreciate all of you taking the time tonight. And thank you, audience. And I think we'll sign off.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.